that was really the place where I learned to take a holistic point of view of how people move and live. So you take into account not only the physicality, but also the emotions, the hormones, maybe even the spiritual side. All these processes have an effect on how you move through life.
Welcome to Making Change with Your Money, a podcast that highlights the stories and strategies of women who experienced a big life transition and overcame challenges as they redefined financial success for themselves. Now here's your host, certified financial planner, Laura Rotter.
I'm so excited to have as my guest today, Monique de la Cour. She is a personal trainer and a health coach. For the past 19 years, Monique has helped improve the balance, strength, and health of women over 50 who worry about osteoporosis and are afraid of falling. Monique helps her clients regain confidence and energy in a safe manner so that they may continue their active lifestyle. So welcome, Monique, to the Making Change with Your Money podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here, Laura. And I look forward to our conversation.
Me too. So I always start my conversations with the same question. I know, you grew up in a different country, but what was money like in your family growing up?
I would say it was tight. It's not that we didn't have enough as children, but we were always very aware that we had to watch all the money going out. Now, I grew up in the Netherlands, and the Dutch have the same reputation as the Scottish, that we're cheap, hence a lot of expressions here.
I didn't know that.
Dutch treats, those types of expressions. So that's where they come from. But I also realized that, and I only recognized this at a later age, is that both my parents were little kids during the Holocaust. And so when they grew up, the country was in shambles and there was no money. And eventually they were okay, but it did mean that they had to be extremely careful for a long time in their families of origin. So I understand why, this came down to us as well. Obviously, my generation, I was born in the early 60s. So it wasn't that long after the war ended. And in Europe, it had an effect on every single family. So I think that's part of where that came from. Yes, my parents, they were not college educated, but they worked very hard. And we ended up having a nice middle-class life. Again, in the Netherlands, everything is on a smaller scale, including finances. But we were never deprived of anything. We had I would say, a very nice childhood.
Thanks for sharing that. You've said we. So how many siblings do you have and where are you in the birth order, Monique?
I'm the oldest of three. I have a brother, a middle child. So he was a typical middle child. And then I have a younger sister. And they and their families both still live in the Netherlands in the same town as where my mother lives. I'm the only one here in the United States. I've always been the wanderer. And that started at an early age. I think it had to do with the fact that I had to go to high school in a different city. So every morning I would get on my bike and it was about a half-hour bike ride. So I didn't have the same connection that my siblings did with the town. And then after graduation, I didn't want to stay in the Netherlands. I wanted to learn different languages. So I lived in other countries. And then the big one, of course, eventually was to come here to the United States. So I guess that has been a theme for me, always traveling. And doesn't mean I'm unsettled, but I love to learn and then see what's out in the world.
I love hearing how you're a learner. I too am a learner, and traveling certainly is a way that helps you learn about other cultures and then by extension yourself. What was it that you shared that you didn't go to school locally? It sounded like you couldn't. What was the variable that affected that?
High school in the Netherlands is not the same as here. you test into a certain level and you go to that level school. And I believe it's still that way, actually. And depending on the level that you're in, you either go to university, you go to the higher professional schools, mid-level professional schools, or lower level professional schools. So everybody going to college is not a thing. If you go to university, you go straight into studying law, economics, medicine, whatever it is you're going to study. If you want to be a teacher, you go to one of the higher professional level schools. If you want to be a bookkeeper, you go to a mid-level professional school. So it's a different system. But it starts with the high schools, and the level where I was at was outside of town. So that's why I had to get on my bike.
Thank you. I didn't realize it started in high school. I did know that obviously not only in the Netherlands, all over Europe, there isn't this concept of liberal arts college and then you specialize. It's much more rigorous, if you will, and you either go on to higher or to technical schools. I didn't realize that started in high school, though. So thanks for sharing that with us. And in the same way that you said, Dutch resonates for you of a culture that's relatively, has a scarcity mentality, if you will, around finance. I also think of Dutch culture as being on bicycles. So thanks for sharing.
Okay, well, the bicycle thing I think is more positive, paints a more positive picture of the country, because I really don't think that the Dutch are any cheaper than anybody else.
But it is true, the term going Dutch, I'm familiar with it.
Yes, indeed.
So explain to, our listeners the progression of high school and college and your educational journey and how that led you to leave the country ultimately.
Well, there was some zigzagging. So I did not know what I wanted to do at the end of high school. And like I just said, if you wanted to go and continue studying, you had to basically know what exactly you wanted to study. There was no do-over. But what I did know is that I wanted to travel. So I moved first to Switzerland, and I was there for 6 months, to be honest. Enjoyed it for the first 3 months, but then I was really bored. As beautiful as the country is, it was not a good place to be for a young person at that time. So I didn't stay too long. I came back to the Netherlands, still didn't know exactly what I was going to do. So I worked in tourism, which has been great in hindsight. It really helped with my language skills because I was forced to speak several languages. And I'm still really grateful for that up to this day. And then I got it in my mind that I wanted to get much better at French. And I moved to Paris for 2 years. And I had a wonderful situation.
So you were in your early, I'm sorry to interrupt. You were in your early 20s when you moved?
No, not yet, because I skipped a grade in school. So I was actually 16 when I finished high school.
Wow, that's young.
Yeah, I was very young, hence the fact that I hadn't made up my mind yet. It took a long time. So I moved to Paris, which was wonderful. I lived with a family in the center of Paris, where I acted as their au pair from 4:00 in the afternoon on. During the day, I studied French. And then on the weekends, I would take French tourists all over Europe. I worked for a travel agency that worked with corporations mostly, which is a very common thing in France, that I guess employee funds pay for trips of up to a week, sometimes 2 weeks. So initially, I took people to the Netherlands, of course, every single weekend. That got pretty old, even though I got to see my family, which was lovely. But then I started to travel all over Europe. And here I was, this little thing, addressing all these groups in French. And I had a blast. It was wonderful. So I had a great time there for a few years. But then it was time to become more serious again. And I went back to the Netherlands with the idea of settling down. And I ended up working for a number of years for a well-known Dutch brewery. And that was a great job as well. Again, very international. I worked for duty-free worldwide exports. So we exported alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks to military facilities, duty-free facilities, ship chandlers on the tiniest islands in the Pacific Ocean. So besides languages, that was also really good for my geography. So I still love trivia. I know so many port cities and oceans and rivers, and that all came from that.
And Monique, what was your role within the company?
I was an assistant export manager, so basically assisting the manager in the sales process, and most of all, putting lots and lots of beer into containers and calculating how many crates or pallets would go into each of these containers. Yes.
Interesting. So that was based back in the Netherlands.
Yeah. And I lived in the center of Amsterdam at the time. So it was just, great for somebody in their early 20s at that point. But then one night I met the person who would become my future husband, who was an American. And he was just passing through, but we did become friends, and eventually more than friends. And then we had to decide whether he was about to start law school, whether he would study law in the US or in the Netherlands. And to be honest, there was no need for additional English-speaking lawyers in the Netherlands simply because everybody speaks English anyway. So it just made sense for him to start school in the US. And that's where I joined him. And that's how we ended up living in New York City.
Where in New York City?
Manhattan. I worked for initially the Dutch tax desk of Ernst & Young. And to be honest, I found it very hard to work with numbers. I'm sorry, because I know you have an affinity for numbers, but for me, it was not a good fit. And then I joined a French, Lalique, the crystal manufacturer, who also carries high-end silver and porcelain, so all super luxurious products, where again, I was able to use my French, and I loved working there. Did that for a few years until they decided to move to New Jersey. At that point, we were still living in New York City, so I did not stay with them for too long after that. The reverse commute was terrible. And then I ended up going to a small private family bank, where again, I worked for a number of years until I gave birth to my first child. So as you can see, a lot of discontinuity. And then I guess the other thing that I had discontinued in the Netherlands was my education, because when I worked at Heineken, I finally figured out that I wanted to study organizational marketing, and I was well into it, but then I ended up moving to the United States, so I didn't finish it. And when I came here, I did pick it up again, and I was fortunate to be able to do that at the New School, which is a very robust program at the time for people in different learning situations. So I did that after work. I would go there. I guess they didn't have that many what are they called again? Schools for professional continuation. Anyhow, so eventually I got my BA in psychology through the New School.
Interesting. So, a couple of questions are coming up for me. First of all, you've noted disparate roles you had, Monique, but what's the through line that you see? Was it your language skills? What exactly were the skills that you were emphasizing as you spoke to Lalique or other places you worked?
I think my language skills helped me at the time. And then I would say people skills and curiosity. I love learning about new people, new products, new situations, even though it can be very unsettling too. It's not always easy, don't get me wrong. Coming to the US was quite a cultural shock, to say the least. But yeah, I would say that those are things that still play a huge role in my life. As you mentioned earlier, still love learning. And in a way, that's how we met as well. We are in a group of women that love to learn. And it never gets old, right? I'm going to be so sad the day that I don't want to learn anymore.
Oh, that will never happen.
I don't think so either.
So because you mentioned a role that again seemed to involve numbers.
The private bank.
Yes. What were you doing at the private bank?
I was assisting the investment managers, and it was interesting. But again, to me, it wasn't very satisfying that you help extremely wealthy people become even wealthier. So that's too limiting for me. I don't relate to people on that level. I love to hear people's stories. I don't want to know what their bank accounts look like.
And also you mentioned ultimately you got your BA in psychology. How in your mind was that connected to organizational marketing?
Well, even when I was studying marketing, I didn't do too well in the more, the numbers oriented side, but I was more than fine with, what's that called? Behavioral marketing, behavioral economics. I love that. I, find that fascinating, why people make choices, why people decide to buy things. Actually, an interesting situation for me was when I came to the US, I spoke English, quite well, English. So when I would go to grocery stores, I would see these endless, varieties of, say, cereals. And I would just stand there because in the Netherlands, we would have maybe 10, 15 at the most. And here, you see far more than that. And I could, read, of course, and I understood what the boxes were saying, but I had such a hard time figuring out why I should pick this one over that, because it was, the taste was unfamiliar to me. And I thought, this is such a pure marketing thing. I'm basically just looking at the colors and the typesetting and whatever appeals to me, because they're all the same, right? It's just cereal. But yeah, it doesn't sound that I was coming from a country of scarcity. It's just, cereal is an example because it's not something that is commonly eaten in the Netherlands.
Oh, it's not? So what do people have for breakfast?
Usually a slice of bread with either cheese, or we love all kinds of chocolate sprinkles. If you've ever visited the Netherlands, you've probably seen that in a hotel. Put some butter on your slice of bread, chocolate sprinkles on it. And, that's how kids often start their day. It's good. And then the cheeses, of course, are unparalleled. Yeah.
So then I'm really curious to hear the journey from how you just left us, which is, okay, you decided to stay home you had one child. So you became a full-time mom and you were in your 30s?
Yes, I was the full-time mom. At that point, I was approaching my mid-30s. Yeah, when my second child came around, I was in my mid-30s. And I was a mom in suburban New Jersey, and I had the privilege of being able to stay home with my kids. We did not have a nanny. Eventually, I found a person who would look after the kids one afternoon a week. But on the other hand, because I don't have any family here, I really didn't have that much support. So that was rough. I would say that I found a lot of solace in a play group that I belong to, because, not having family around that can help you out every once in a while was not easy. But I settled in a lovely area of New Jersey, and I lived there for, I think, 25 years or so. And when my youngest was getting ready to go to preschool, I decided that I wanted to go back to work and combine that with the passion of mine, which was health and fitness. I had always been a very active child. My family was very active. Both my parents were amazing swimmers. My father was a fantastic water polo player who would play on the national team every once in a while. He eventually went on to manage swimming pools. So I was always swimming and doing sports, and it's just in my blood. So being able to do that, not swimming, but, having movement as a profession was just, very satisfying to me. And then plus, I knew that I could teach it to others. So this was the way to go. In addition, I was able to set my own hours, which was perfect with young kids at home. So I started part-time first for a Jewish community organization and then eventually privately as well. And I've done that for almost 20 years now. I've slowly built on it. I've become more specialized because when you first start out, you have no idea what you're doing. And it's so scary because you worry that you may hurt a person. But then once you keep studying and get to know people better, it becomes so satisfying to help people lead a pain-free lifestyle. So just to go back to how when you start out in that profession, you basically get a diploma, which is like a base level. And from there on,
I'm like, what kind of training? What organization?
I did it through the American Council on Exercise, and then you can call yourself a personal trainer. And then very quickly, I realized that everybody was so complicated, in particular postural issues. And I realized I had to know a lot more about the spine and posture as such. So then I went to the Czech Institute, which stands for Certified Holistic Exercise Specialist. And that was really the place where I learned to take a holistic point of view of how people move and live. So you take into account not only the physicality, but also the emotions, the hormones, maybe even the spiritual side. All these processes have an effect on how you move through life. And I'm so glad that I did that because it really helped me understand individual bodies. No two people are the same. It has given me the assessment skills on which I really pride myself that I'm able to talk with people, look at the way they move, have them answer questionnaires to really figure out what the underlying issues are of your pain. If you have shoulder pain, it doesn't come out of nowhere, right? I mean, unless it's been a fall or crash, there's probably something else going on. And even that fall may have been caused by bad posture or weakness in the legs. And so I love to dig deeper and really see what's going on underneath. I would never just tell you, oh, Laura, you should do this or that without doing a thorough assessment.
I myself did a yoga teacher training. It's now quite a while ago. And I remember through some of the work we did there, discovering, not surprisingly, that, I have one side of my body that's much weaker than the other. But if you're not in a position to be thinking about these things, it's, now it's like, of course, each side of our body is different. And then we've learned over time to compensate. If you hurt an ankle, you end up compensating and other parts of your body are taking over and may become compromised. And I think for most of us who are not in any way involved in thinking about movement, after I did that teacher training, I found myself just watching how people walk, how people stand.
Yes.
Whether people lock out their knees or it's fascinating to watch how people use their bodies, let alone how I use my body. So Monique, I'm curious, do you do assessments over Zoom or how do you work?
I do. So when I first start working with somebody, we first have a conversation and just a general conversation about,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Step back. So when you say working with someone, I did introduce you as someone who works with women 50 years old plus. Is that by and large the population you work with? Or is it more diverse?
Yes. Well, I certainly work with men as well. But I very quickly realized that, if you're looking to improve your running times, I'm not the person for you. I like to look at, specific issues or problems even, or people who truly have serious health issues. I like working with them. But if you, want to do triathlons, then I'm probably not your person. No.
Thank you for helping nail that down. So now I've contacted you for an assessment. How do you work?
So first we'll have a conversation, and then hopefully you can tell me why you reached out to me. Do you have specific concerns? Why do you feel that, for instance, your balance is not good? What has been going on? In which situations do you notice that it's not optimal? We'll talk a little bit about your lifestyle, what you would like to do in the future, and then we make an appointment for an assessment. The assessment takes about an hour and a half. Not necessarily, but I do assess your balance, strength, and I take you through a series of stretches for the entire body. And then I'm watching you on screen, and you will have to tell me, which side is tight, which one is not. And then I have a whole bunch of information. Oh, and then I will also ask you to have one of your family members make a short video of you walking so that I know what your gait looks like. And then I look at all that stuff together and I start working on a program. We talk a little bit more about maybe sub goals, not just the main goal, but also things underneath. And then, start working together via Zoom. Every single time I see you on screen, it's basically a way for me to assess you as well, because I can report and say, oh, your squats are getting better, or that stretch seems to go a little bit further. And so I can keep progressing you safely. Now, it's very well possible that, say, your upper body is not progressing very quickly, but your lower body is. So then we just adjust the program. We keep progressing the lower body, but maybe with the upper body, there are some tweaks that need to be made, or we notice that there is maybe a weakness in one of the rotator cuff muscles based on the movements that you do in one way or another. And then we'll adjust that again. So it's always looking at an individual and specifically adapting to your needs. And, sometimes you walk in and you may say, oh, today my left shoulder hurts. So then we switch up the program. We'll do something else. Other days you may walk in, oh, I'm so stressed, I just can't work out today. And then we'll do something that's called working in. So maybe more yoga oriented, or breathing exercises, or movements that come from the Alexander technique, or some rolling. And maybe that's all you can do on that day, because if you're stressed, you should not exercise, and certainly not exercise hard, because exercise in and of itself is a stress as well. It's a good stress, but one day or another, it may not be what you need. So, also for the client, it's very important to become more and more aware of what's going on with their own bodies. I mean, you as a yoga teacher probably know this, but there are a lot of people where the body and the mind are almost disconnected. I have some people whom I've worked with for a long, long time, and every time it's like the first time. And it's just very difficult for them to sense what's going on. It's just not the way their mind works. It's very hard. So eventually we come there, but it takes a long time.
I'd have to agree with you that culturally, and speaking for myself, we tend to live in our minds. And I feel like, I'm sure yoga was a contributor, because I'm both a yoga and a meditation practitioner. And I'm so aware when I'm up here, and can then say, at brief moments at a time, what does the air feel like on your body? What does the seat underneath you feel like? What is just bringing it down into the body, and not staying in the story and the whirlwind that is always, I'm pointing to my head, going on up here. I'm curious, Monique, because you mentioned the Alexander technique. I have experience. I have a bad back, and I've really benefited from working with a Feldenkrais practitioner. So what role, if anything, do those kind of modalities, which is just very aware again, of how we hold our bodies. How do you integrate those modalities into your work?
So those modalities are part of the Czech curriculum that I did. I am not a Feldenkrais or Alexander Technique instructor, but I guess these techniques were borrowed with permission. And what helps tremendously are the mobilizations that you can do through these techniques. They're often quite small, but help to loosen up the spine, for instance. And sometimes that's all a person needs or all that they can do, especially if they're in sciatic pain, shoulder pain. You just want them to mobilize the spine. And then hopefully, once the spine is mobilized, posture has hopefully slightly improved. And then you can start adding some strength exercises. In some instances, it may take quite a while before you start adding weights, even body weight. It may not, happen with everybody right away, just because the spine is not moving properly. I mean, look at it, for instance, somebody with very rounded shoulders who sits at a computer all day, which is, many of us, of course. You cannot start exercising like that, because what you do is you start strengthening yourself in that less than optimal posture. So even if you don't go to, specific Alexander technique or Rolfing type of movements, you should at least stretch, get those shoulders back before you start working with resistance, because you're just going to exacerbate the problem that's already there. And that's, of course, something that we want to avoid at all costs. You cannot strengthen yourself in a suboptimal posture. I don't know if you've ever heard the term, you can't shoot a cannon from a canoe.
Never.
And yeah. Well, but if you consider, the torso, or you could even say the core muscles, if they're weak, then there is no base, right? You can lift all the weight you want with your arms or legs. The injuries are going to happen along the spine. So you have to start along the spine first. That's where all movement starts. It starts in the brain and then, makes its way down to the extremities. So you have to make sure that pathway is in as good a condition as possible.
So it sounds like everything you do is quite tailored to the individual. And again, as I introduced you, Monique, I emphasized balance, though you did mention pain a lot. So I guess my questions are twofold. How are balance and pain interrelated? And why do people primarily come to you?
Well, it was a slow progression in a way. I noticed that more and more people were starting to come to me after a fall, or, they were starting to worry about falling, and nothing had happened yet, but it was just in the back of their heads. And then, I realized that something was going on there, and that we had to look deeper than just help them regain strength after the fall or just strengthening them overall. So, and then the other thing with regards to pain is if you have pain in the body, you move differently, which makes you more likely to fall.
I mean, it is one of the things I learned from Feldenkrais that, I was just exacerbating the pain by, using my body differently to avoid it unconsciously. So,
yeah, I mean, to the extreme, imagine that you're so afraid of falling, as if you were walking on ice. You start to take smaller steps, and then, of course, you're more likely to fall then.
Really? Is that true? I have to remember that next time I walk on ice.
Well, I hope you won't be. But, when people take very small steps,
yes,
and not so much on ice, that's probably,
okay.
Didn't describe that very well. But if you see someone walking with small steps, it's very well possible that their upper body moves faster than the lower body. And then, they can tumble forward.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes. And what I also noticed over time, in particular working with women, is that with the onset of menopause and perimenopause, really, a lot of, I wouldn't say problems, but issues come up that may affect your balance in the long run. So I'm not saying that menopause causes balance issues, but those years are years in which we really should take some preemptive measures to make sure that we don't become a fall risk. And then, what I'm talking about is the onset of chronic disease, chronic diseases that begin during perimenopause. And then with that becomes the use of medications. And especially if we use 3 or more medications, the interaction is likely to affect our balance, because especially if one of them is either a sleep aid, an anti-anxiety, antidepressive, or heart medication, they may cause drowsiness, feelings of instability. And it's not just prescription medications, it can happen with supplements as well. So if you take 3 or more medications and or supplements, definitely discuss it with your doctor, because it could increase your risk of falling. Our vision changes. We all know that. So stay on top of your prescription. Definitely go every year. And if anything is out of the ordinary, go see your eye doctor, because depth perception is so very important. And then, of course, during the pandemic, we wore masks, which also impeded our vision, or at least our depth perception. So, vision is very, very important. Vestibular diseases, some people are really helped by the epimaneuver when they start getting vertigo. That's not something I do. You need to see a specialist for that. But definitely stay on top of it. Don't let it get away from you. And postural deterioration. We spoke about that already. So especially once we're in our 50s, a lifetime of activities start to take its toll. So, for instance, if you've always sat at your desk in front of a computer, now, those changes in the neck, in the thoracic spine may become permanent. You may have a lot less leg strength because you're not moving as much as you used to. You sit a lot for your profession, or, at night when we're so tired, we just plop on the couch. So our leg strength really diminishes. And then, of course, the core muscles tend to go to mush. I know a lot of us complain about the menopausal belly, and there is, of course, a lot we can do. We cannot make it go away completely, but if we strengthen ourselves, eat as cleanly as we can, there's a lot we can do. But it is unfortunately a fact that under the influence of hormones, fat tends to migrate to our waist. You see very few mature women with large thighs, but you see plenty of them with a more ample waist, and that is the lack of estrogen. That I would say that is the number one complaint of women who come to see me, besides, about their physicality. And then the other one are, upper arms. So I often think, but there's so many other bigger issues that you should think about. But no, it's the belly and the arms, because that's what people see when they look in the mirror.
So I was about to ask, am I correct in understanding that people come to you for balance issues, but it sounds like they also come to ostensibly lose weight or lose inches?
Yes, that's often a reason they come to me, but they're usually bigger issues that have to be dealt with first. Although those who specifically come for balance are generally very realistic about what they need, and their looks are secondary. So that, I think, is wonderful, because the looks are not what's going to extend our health span. Whereas being able to remain upright, that's going to make a huge difference in the quality of life, and remain free of injury and pain.
Yes, I certainly in my own life recognize that just staying healthy, eating well, and exercising adequately has become the most important thing to me. And, what my body looks like. I mean, that's part of, letting go of attachment. I was always someone who was always in good shape. I am still in good shape. And I recognize that at the age of 64, my body is not going to look like what it did at 24, 34, not even 54. It changes, the shape changes. And, having watched several people I love get sick and unable to eat and becoming, so thin, the intellectual part of me, which luckily I'm in touch with more and more rather than the emotional part, is thank God when I eat, I gain weight. Like what
Yes.
a gift. The metabolism works and I have an appetite, and celebrating that rather than being frustrated with it.
Do you know the French saying, Elle est bien dans sa peau? She's good in her skin. And it sounds like you're very representative of that you are happy in your own skin, you focus on your health, and you know what good health is supposed to feel like.
Yes. And of course, in our culture, as women, we are given an ideal. And, we don't want to get older. So many friends were getting injections and potions, a couple of times a year. And, you can't fight it at the end of the day, or you can, but, it doesn't really, it's going to get you no matter what. I'm curious, do you have a number of people that come specifically for pain?
No, it's usually secondary. But it's usually being caused by something else. They know what the diagnosis is. I then often work with their doctor or their physical therapist and follow up on the program that has been prescribed to them by a physical therapist, and then start integrating that into all body type movements. I see a lot of people who have just been released from physical therapy, but the physical therapist will focus on one specific area of your body. And then say, for instance, you have something in your right shoulder. Well, now I'm going to focus on incorporating the healed shoulder into day-to-day functional movements, whatever those functional movements are for you. So if you like to play pickleball, we do things that are specific to that sport. If you like to play with your grandkids on the floor, you do something else. Grandkids, by the way, are a major source of injury.
I'm not surprised.
Yes. Yeah. They wiggle and, they all of a sudden they can give you a shooting pain down your back.
And especially if, how many people have I seen who are in terrible shape, but they're going to sort of make their way to the floor to play with their grandchildren and pick them up, even though they're now 5 years old and weigh quite a lot. And I could see that it would be a major cause of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the other thing, of course, when I start working with somebody, it's really figuring out what it is they want. So for some, it is indeed being able to play on the floor with their grandkids. Others, may want to start traveling more now that they're possibly close to retirement. Again, others want to play up pickleball. So those are very different movements, and you need to know specifically what is required for each of these activities, and that's what you focus on. So that's, I guess, the gist of functional exercise. Your body has to function to support your lifestyle, whatever your lifestyle is. There's no right or wrong. Just do what you can. And the beauty of all of it is that you can start very small, and these small changes have a huge effect. And I love that. It gives confidence to people. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, it's not so hard to pick up my grandkid, or it's not so hard to get up from the floor without hands. I love that when I see that growth in people.
I love how you said that, Monique. We've explored how you love people and you have curiosity. And it seems like you found a role as a provider that in some ways even feels like a mission to you and satisfies your need for relationship and always learning and connection. So I'm going to ask you as we get towards the end of our conversation, you've had so many changes of your life in terms of geography and profession. So over this time, how has your definition of success and perhaps even financial success shifted?
Well, I would say that, first of all, having good health to me is the most important thing. During the past 2 years, I had to deal with 2 diagnoses of stage 0 breast cancer. First time I was treated, it was there. And then I was diagnosed the second time in less than a year after many, many different pathologists looking at my tissues. An 8-month long process of not knowing what it actually was. I was finally told very recently, just a few months ago, that what I currently have is not cancerous, but changes caused by radiation. And I think after that news, I've just learned to appreciate my health so much. You can probably imagine that as a personal trainer and a health coach, I was very, very surprised when I heard this for the first time. I don't have any family history of breast cancer. So this came out of nowhere. And for a short while, I was beating myself up. So how could this happen to me? Did I not eat right? Or did I not work out enough? But then I realized it can happen to anyone. But the second time was a huge blow. I have to admit that. That was incomprehensible to me. And then the fact that they took 8 months and 7 different pathologists to determine what was going on was a very difficult process. But so my health is something that I cherish very much. And then I would say being able to be in charge of my time and being able to do with my money what I want to do has been, I guess, a wealth of freedom.
Well, time freedom,
Yes.
I guess. I often say that we have 3 scarce resources, money, of course, but also time and also energy. So it sounds like you feel like you are now abundant in time resources. Is that correct?
Yes, I am. I also recently moved to a new city and made it my mission to meet as many people as possible within a short period of time. I've done that and I've already made a few good friends. Yes. And I realize how precious relationships are and the fact that I can choose when to spend time with people in my life that I love and care for in a place where I had dreamt of living, I guess makes me feel like a very wealthy woman.
And can you share where you're living now? As I see you in your short sleeves and I'm in a sweater.
Oh, I'm living in New Orleans since earlier this year. And I have found that people who live here are incredibly hospitable, welcoming, always willing to try new things. And I must say, I've also been looking for it a lot more than I did when I lived in New Jersey, where most of my friends were those I met when my kids were young or in school. You know, you meet them on the soccer fields or the PTA. And now I'm much more intentional about going out and meeting people through meetups or different nationwide and local organizations that I'm part of. And it's been a wonderful experience. I would recommend it to everyone. I guess friends and putting yourself out there and taking that first step. But it's so easy as it turns out. Everybody wants to be approached because everybody is scared of being rejected. And if you even just say, oh, I love those yellow boots or whatever, people immediately brighten up. And I just love it. That's how you start conversations. And it's everybody wants to be seen and heard.
So true. And it takes us getting older to recognize that and to, not be stuck in ourselves. And as you said, our fear of rejection, but look around the room if you walk into a new space and who seems to be standing alone and who could you welcome into the space. And I definitely share that since the pandemic. I too have become much more social and met many more women like yourself, Monique. And as an introvert, I'm really enjoying it. It's quite a pleasure to get out of my own skin and put myself out there to help other people feel at ease. I know that you do have for our listeners a balance assessment that I will share in the show notes. And is there anything else you'd like to share before we end our conversation?
No, I mean, I would love it if you would take the balance assessment. It's basically a video where I'll talk you through it. And if you have any questions whatsoever about what you're feeling while doing it, or maybe you do feel unsteady, I'd be happy to speak with you. Just reach out, no charge, of course. But I'd love to help you.
Thank you so much. This has been such a nice way to get to know each other, Monique. I enjoyed our conversation. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Monique de la Cour, owner of Monique de la Cour Health and Fitness. Some of my takeaways that I'm happy to share: always be learning. Since graduating from school, Monique worked in disparate roles in various countries, from au pair and tour guide in Paris, to assistant manager for Heineken in the Netherlands, to working for Ernst & Young and then Lalique in New York, and then a small private bank in New Jersey, before becoming a certified health and wellness coach and recently moving to New Orleans. The through line in all these roles is her love of learning about new people, new products, and new situations. My second takeaway: if you're experiencing pain in your body, recognize that the cause may not only be physical. When Monique works with a client, she always starts by doing an assessment. She, of course, takes into account what is taking place physically in terms of pain or balance issues, but just as importantly, she explores what may be going on emotionally, what's going on hormonally, and what's taking place spiritually. As she points out, all these processes affect how we move through life. My third takeaway: when helping others, listen for the need that lies beneath what they think they need. Monique noted that often people come to her because they would like to lose weight. However, looks are not what is going to extend their health span. The ability to have balance, to stand upright, is what is going to make a huge difference in their quality of life and their ability to remain free of injury and pain. Are you enjoying this podcast? Please don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss next week's episode. And if you're enjoying the show, a rating and a review would be greatly appreciated and will help other women just like you to find the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Making Change with Your Money. Certified financial planner Laura Rotter specializes in helping people just like you organize, clarify, and invest their money in order to support a life of purpose and meaning. Go to www.TrueAbundanceAdvisors.com/workbook for a free resource to help you on your journey. Disclaimer: please remember that the information shared by this podcast does not constitute accounting, legal, tax, investment, or financial advice. It's for information purposes only. You should seek appropriate professional advice for your specific information.